Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to our annual flagship event, the third edition of the Celerity Supply Chain Conference and Awards, sponsored by Blue Yonder, and our logistics partner is Blue Dart. My name is Charulata Bansal, and I am going to be your host for this evening. This packed 3 hours brings to you two very interesting panel discussions on the theme of post pandemic supply chain management, followed by our annual awards function, felicitating young talent in the under 30 and the under 40 categories. So, a very warm welcome once again to all our speakers, our award winners, and all of you sitting in our audience. Living with the pandemic has been a way of life now, with words like the new normal and the next normal becoming increasingly redundant. These last 20 months have been a roller coaster in the lives of supply chain professionals. Anxiety, though, gave way to encouraging signs of revival and a unique opportunity to redefine supply chain operations. Which brings me to our very first session of the day, India's supply chain revolution, where our esteemed panelists will share their experiences. Our esteemed panelists have also been the jury on the Celerity 40 under 40 and 30 under 30 awards. I invite our very first speaker, Professor Ashok Pundir. He is a professor with National Institute of Engineering, Industrial Engineering, NITIE, Mumbai. He was a Dean Student Affairs till October 2017. Professor Pundir has more than 37 years of industrial and academic experience. He has worked for more than 16 years at the Premier Automobiles Limited, Mumbai, in the area of industrial engineering and projects. For the last 20 years, he has been working as faculty member at NITIE in industrial engineering, project management, work system design, manufacturing systems, service operations, and supply chain management. Professor Pundir has received recognitions and awards from various organizations and is actively associated with various professional bodies. A huge round of applause for our next speaker on the panel, Mr. Akhil Srivastava. Akhil is BSc MBA in Agribusiness and MS in Management. He is also a Tata and Forbes Marshall Scholar at Graduate School of Business, Stanford University. He is an agripreneur and supply chain professional with progressive E2E supply chain experience with Fortune 500 firms and successful startups. His experience of working and collaborating across end-to-end business domains in conjugation with innovative technology and systems automation by utilizing skills of change management and design thinking has been of help in building successful and scalable businesses globally. A round of applause for the next panelist, Mr. Ranjan Sharma, CIO and Head of Supply Chain, Captive E-commerce and Quality Assurance at Bestseller India. Ranjan is an experienced leader in technology, supply chain, and e-commerce with more than 2 decades in retail. He graduated from Kolkata University with MBA from the American International University of Management and Technology and a GNNIT degree from NIIT. I would now like to welcome on stage Mr. Royston Fernandes. Royston is General Manager in the Consumer Supply Chain Analytics team at Johnson & Johnson. He brings over 20 years of supply chain experience accumulated during his stints in industry as well as supply chain consulting. While consulting with Siemens, Ernst & Young, and IBM, Royston has advised leading Indian and multinational companies and developed supply chain insights. He has led supply chain transformations focused on manufacturing, resource planning, S&OP, e-sourcing, and analytics in the engineering goods, automotive, pharmaceutical, and consumer goods sectors. An engineering graduate from Mumbai with post-graduation from SGSOM IIT Mumbai, Royston also holds supply chain certifications from Apex and Goldratt schools. Please now put your hands together for Mr. Ravikant Parvataneni. Ravikant is the India head of Argon & Co. and he comes with 2 decades of experience in DC design, network strategy, and transforming supply chain networks for leading Indian companies and MNCs. He is a specialist in design of warehouse automation and implementation of WS, and he has been in leadership roles in transportation and P&L management for Indian 3PL businesses. And now our panel gets complete with Mr. Umesh Madhyan, VP Logistics at Hindustan Coca-Cola Beverages. Umesh, as his boss says, is responsible for one of the largest logistics in India. No one handles the scale and the complexity as is done at Hindustan Coca-Cola. Umesh comes with more than 20 years of experience in multiple roles such as regional sales administration and logistics, international procurement, national demand and supply planning, national physical distribution, and re engineering supply chain processes for SAP. Implementation, implementation with 5,000 SKUs. He is also the steering committee member of ANCHAM, CII, and USIBC. He is currently the president of Chamber of Visionary Supply Chain Leaders in Gurgaon. And now, with a huge round of applause, let me introduce Mr. Sanjay Desai, the moderator for this panel. Sanjay runs his own advisory consulting practice in end-to-end supply chain domain. He sits as an advisory board member for multiple startups and SME enterprises in Asia. He also runs an executive headhunting search organization under MRI Worldwide brand. He is an honorary life member for Institute of Directors IOD India and an overseas board member on SME Chambers India. He is based out of Singapore and he has worked for global brands like Unilever, Aventis, Pharma, ExxonMobil, Apple Computers, Dell Technologies, etc. And has been running their global supply chains in multiple geographies over 38 years. Thank you all for joining us today. I now hand over the baton to Sanjay ji. Over to you, Sanjay ji.
Thank you, Charu. That has been an who's who for the last 5-10 minutes, right? Amazing introduction. So thanks a lot, Celerity Supply Chain. Thanks a lot for all the delegates who joined today. It means a lot that you have given your personal time to this wonderful webinar. This fantastic round of speakers will address many more elements. What has happened after pre-pandemic, right? Pre-pandemic as well as post-pandemic. And what are the current trends that we see post-pandemic especially, and how companies should change their ways, right? Change management is the order of the day. Words like transformation, digitalization, the new normal are completely today, being used by everybody. Let us address some of the areas where organizations need to look at carefully, double click them, and see what lies underneath and what strategies we need to deploy. So let's get on moving. Okay? Thank you, everybody, and my panelists who have contributed in an amazing manner today, despite the busy schedule. So thanks to everybody, Akhil, Professor Ashok, Ranjan, Ravikant, Royston, and Umesh. Let me set the ball rolling, getting Akhil, you right on the spot, and talking in terms of sustainability, right? And what has COVID disruption taught the global supply chains, right? And what will the successful supply chain companies they will do help bankroll their capabilities and invest more in a sustainable business model? What do you think?
A very pertinent question. I think everyone on this call would have a thought would have just passed their brains as soon as you said existence. We all struggled for existence of 2 years in various kinds, whether it's on personal life, whether it's on business fronts, whether it's saving lives or saving our businesses. It was oxygen on personal life, but it was money on the other side of the business. So I would say, to me, sustainability is all about being relevant. It is about being differentiated. And in pre current and post pandemic work, and I'm taking post pandemic as well because it will be an endemic as people are citing it out, looks like the businesses will have to think afresh. There needs to be thinking well beyond just cost and profits. It would be a holistic game wherein everyone has to start with an end game in mind, which means we are all looking forward for a unique start. We are looking for a ability, B ambitions. So while most of us and every business will have an ambition, there's also an ability which needs to be developed to be continuously monitoring our progress, delivering results both profitably and sustainably. So to me, it's about the ability and the willingness to be sustainable. Ability because we still are looking forward at innovative ways of being sustainable. Willingness because unless you don't have that willingness to look at the ability of delivering, it becomes very difficult to actually execute it on the ground. It would then be a white paper. It will not be action. So that's my thought. I think time is ripe for us to start thinking disruptions, working on executing them on ground, and for sure make this as a better world for all of us to thrive for maybe million more years.
Excellent, Akhil. And good points, right? In terms of being relevant, in terms of differentiating yourself from the competition, and at the same time, have the willingness and ability to think more outside in, more for the customers, right? Which is a fantastic thought. Let's go over to Royston, and I would like to bring Royston on the screen. And Royston, taking that part ahead of the shift in the customers, right, and being relevant and thinking outside in, what do you think? How has demand management changed during and after the pandemic? There has been a lot of demand issues after the pandemic. Some demands went 20, 25 times, and no supply chain can actually keep that sort of inventory, right? Otherwise, something is wrong in that supply chain. And we shifted from smaller buckets to larger buckets. What do you think is the shift, and how is it going to contribute in the future as well?
Hey, thanks for that question, Sanjay. And so let me start actually just by clarifying that my views and opinions are personal, kind of based on my knowledge and experience of these last 2 decades, and they don't represent any official position or a disclaimer, right? Not a position or policy of my organization, Johnson and Johnson, or any of the other organizations I've worked for, right? So that being said, I think Sanjay, you've brought a very valid point, right? I think the first major thing all of us noticed was the impact on demand, right? And how we always looked at demand management. And typically we manage demand looking at trends. And trends means you have an underlying assumption, that what has happened in the past is going to influence what happens in the future. And, there are a lot of, I've been in consulting, right? So there's an analogy like, oh, you're driving a car looking at the rearview mirror, but all said and done, invariably, we somehow pick some trends and we project them, right? And that's been the underlying way we look at demand management. And pandemic completely upturned that assumption, right? There was no correlation now between future and the past. We didn't know exactly when it started last year, how it would spread across the world, right? We didn't know how people would react. For instance, that a very looking back, very amusing run on toilet paper that happened. No one really figured that was going to happen, right? We didn't know how different authorities would react, right? Which governments would really clamp down, which ones would deny, which ones would, and exactly how all of this would impact demand. And you may say, okay, fine, that was last year, right? But if you look back now, this year as well, right, things are not very much different. We're still not, normal. There are still second waves. There are third waves. There are countries which look like they were coming out of their wave and all of a sudden back in the hot seat. And, all said and done, yes, vaccines are good, right? We are all clear that that at least is one good thing, which is really happening and driving return back to normal. But that equitable spread has not happened. So, across the world, there are different challenges with getting people vaccinated. We have a huge amount of misinformation happening, and that again for the educated people contributes even further to the complications, right? So honestly speaking, we are still in a situation where the past is not very well correlated with what's going to happen with the future. And like you mentioned, I think this has kind of driven a shift from large bucket forecasting to small bucket. And when I'm talking about small bucket, I'm talking about granularity, both in terms of geography and in terms of time, right? So we're looking at things at a very low level of granularity. What's happening probably in a very small area of real estate, how demand is happening there on a real-time basis, if possible, right? And because the patterns are so fluctuating, can vary so vary tremendously from region to region or area to area. It is people who have organizations which have been able to actually sense demand at a very low bucket have been able to really pick this up and have been able to respond to this. And that has made a huge difference in short term, right? And here again, I'm drawing a difference between short term and long term. This has been a real change for the short term demand management, right? Longer term, if you look at things, yes, the requirement is still there, right? We still need to plan investments for capacity. We still need to look at how things will move over the next 3 to 5 years. But over the longer horizons, we still have our macro causative factors, right? Demographics, the economic growth patterns, those are not going to go away. Thank God. God forbid, those are the standards on which the whole of the economy runs, right? And those will still remain. Aggregation still works to our benefit. So we hope that, as we progress forward, longer term, we would still be stable. But on the short term, I think what you just pointed out, I think the demand sensing and the small bucket forecasting is here to stay.
Perfect. Great answer. And Royston, as you rightly said, right, there is no correlation between looking back and driving in the front, right, looking in the rear view, as well as the longer term still may continue so that at least supply chains and procurement can plan their overall business planning, sales management also can be done. And thank God that is there. Let's move from demand now to supply, because every time when you talk about demand you have to talk about supply because you have to match, right? That is working capital. And let's get Ravikant now on the screen. And Ravi, from
Yeah.
exactly what Royston mentioned in terms of demand variability, right, in terms of trends, in terms of looking back and driving forward without much information on how the demand is going to shape, right, how organizations will manage the huge variability in the demand, including that long time fences also, right, and align that to your manufacturing and distribution capabilities.
Yeah, interesting question. So, long time, like Austin said, aggregations still work. So that's
Yeah.
relatively easy. But the short term is the real challenge. And I think not knowing what will happen tomorrow or day after is the biggest challenge. So if you know to some level of certainty, you can plan for it. So I think the key thing what organizations are imbibing is what we call a very generic word, but very, very important word in these times is the flexibility. Flexibility in their approach. So it is not about the destination, it's about the journey. How do you plan for tomorrow? How do I, when I come to office tomorrow, if certain things are different, how do I plan for that? So all these are driving multiple things, if you're talking about contracts in sourcing, we talked about demand, we know there's a lot of bunching happening now. I have a contract with Bangladesh to supply my textiles, for example, and tomorrow
Yeah.
Bangladesh is in lockdown. What do I do? So I think and that's just an example. A similar thing happens on the downstream as well. So upstream and downstream supply chains. So I think what organizations are trying to do is trying to look flexibility in those itself. So obviously flexibility costs you, but like somebody said, I think Akhil mentioned that it's not about the cost. It's about efficacy. It's about able to do something. But it's about our ability to deliver. So it's all about can I have a short-term contracts? So instead of longer term contracts, much longer contracts and trying to get products at a much lower cost per piece or cost per kg, I'm trying to see short-term contracts. Short-term contracts give me the flexibility. Tomorrow Bangladesh is not working. Can I import from Pakistan, for example, right? So those are the things which are and even on the 3PL side or distribution side, similar things. I don't want to get into a 5-year contract right now because I don't know, number one, how much, what will I sell tomorrow? Is it going to be B2B versus B2C? What will I sell? Each of them requires a different technology, different processes. So therefore, I think the key thing, how organizations are trying to manage this thing as trying to become more agile and flexible. I think that's the key thing that has to be brought into their DNA, and that has to be there as a part of their day-to-day life. Instead of seeing too much into the destination, I think they say, okay, let's enjoy the journey. Let's move, live for the next day and try to see how flexible we can be tomorrow, for example. Yeah,
Excellent. So agility, flexibility, looking at short
absolutely.
term, and more concentration on your execution plan and do it well first time, right? There is no margin of
Absolutely.
error. Fantastic, Ravikant. That brings to me, we talk about supply, we talk about demand, we talk about the execution part. That means there is a management of risk there, right? And we need to manage risk because you're talking short term, you need to overturn things all. Demand variability is very high. How do you manage risk? And let's get Ranjan onto the screen. And Ranjan, what do you think will be the impact either by the risk management onto the risk management in the new world when supply chain guys and supply chain professionals start to rethink and redesign their new supply chains again?
Thank you, Sanjay. That's an interesting question and a very, very valid question in the current times, because risk is something that we had never even thought about, the kind of risk that we've all undergone. Uh, but there are, if we look at primarily, I think there are three areas of risks that one has to monitor from a business perspective today. One is the political, the second is the technological, and the third is, which is a very, very important aspect, is the societal aspect. When I say political, there is so much happening. There is so much change which is happening at all levels within the political system, within the government system, within the bureaucracy at different levels, and everyone is empowered to take different decisions, going as low as a taluka to going as low as a district, and at a national level, at country level, at a global level. So one has to, every business has to keep an eye in terms of what is the change which is happening, what decisions are being taken, and how is it going to impact. And uh, we need to be very, very careful that this is not going to go away all of a sudden. This is going to stay there, and these changes and these political decisions will continue to impact us in different ways, because this is going to impact decisions in terms of the supply side, in terms of the demand side, where markets will be shut, markets will be operational at different times. The supply side, where factories, the supply chain itself will be impacted because of the availability of the products, the manufacturing cycle itself being available, people in the manufacturing units and the distribution centers available to be able to ensure that this is being fulfilled. On the other front, technology itself has taken the center stage. Uh, we would have never imagined that everything is now going to come back and we are all going to work and do everything, whatever we do in front of a screen. Everything is becoming digital, right from meeting people, uh, to to be able to do your work, to be able to see whatever is being done by your team members who could be sitting a long distance apart. So which means that everything has becoming much more digital, and organizations have to be prepared to make the processes digital, because you cannot sustain with broken processes, which used to run very well when it was a partially a digital process and partially a process which was still manual, where you could control and you could manage things because you could see things. Now, because of the distance, because of people sitting at different places, it might really become very, very different. And technology is a big piece that one has to keep an eye on, and one has to keep upgrading and upskilling your resources, because the most important aspect is also you have a lot of people who you work with. You need to equally upskill them, because it's not just about bringing in the new technology, a new piece which will work and which will bring everything, make bring in the transparency, bring in the visibility, automate the processes. It's not just about that. It is much beyond that. It is about upskilling your people who might not be available in a small closed classroom, where you can train them and retrain them and then be able to figure out and assess if they have understood or if they have not understood, and what change do you need to bring in.
Yeah.
The third aspect is people's life itself has changed completely. Society at large has changed in terms of the way how you behave, in the way how you react to things. What used to be normal, we always used to step out, even uh, before COVID, before this pandemic, and we knew that there is an element of risk when you step out of your home. But those risks were different. Today, no matter how comfortable you are, the moment you step out of your home, the moment you go to a crowded place, the moment you go to a supermarket, there are so many newer aspects which are coming into your mind. And imagine, these could be your very close friends, these could be your very close family members, these could be your very close office colleagues who you could be working with and you could be meeting with. But the way how you
Yeah.
react today, the way how you behave, is so much more different. All of this is going to actually change the whole concept of the risks that people are taking, organizations are taking. And one has to keep in mind that it is not going to remain the same, where we all used to be happily coming to office, meeting up
Yeah.
hundreds of people, and then working together and delivering something. So we have to all learn uh, to be able to work in these environments, in these circumstances, in these situations, where few people will be online, few people will be offline, they will be available there, and still you have to deliver within that constrained timeline. The unknowns, a lot of unknowns, which you can't even plan for and you can't even budget for. So the risk management overall has gone to a very next different level altogether.
Excellent. Perfect, Ranjan. And you address all the three risks, including even upskilling, right? That is again one more risk, upskilling your skill set. So we have talked about demand, supply, we talked about upskilling, we talked about risk. Let me get Umesh onto the screen. And Umesh, I would like to understand what, when we talk all these things in one bracket, right, on an end-to-end paradigm, it's actually about elasticity in your supply chain, right, in your value network. It's all about being elastic now, being agile. So what are those elements you think that we need to manage when a supply chain really would like to be more elastic?
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, panelists. So Royston disclaimer, copy paste. I'll save on time. It's the safe disclaimer for me as well for my organization. And I'll move on to the question. So elasticity, yes, we spoke resilience, we spoke flexibility. I think elasticity is something which is also what we learned during this 2 years, 2 seasons of pandemic. And there are different elements to this whole piece, right from your demand planning till your delivery onto the shelf. I think how is your system trying to make sure that there is elasticity of your catalog to begin with? So we shrunk our catalog in the first place to ensure that we manage inventory well, and we are able to ensure that the right channel gets the right kind of priority SKUs, and we did a channel wise kind of elasticity very soon, moving on from production lines to different molds to different packs. So that is the first piece where you plan your catalog from a demand planning perspective. From a supply planning perspective, how do you exactly shift your strategy from a downstream to an upstream? How do you start thinking more about inventory cover as a whole rather than working in silos between raw material inventory versus your finished goods inventory versus your inventory at the depots at the last leg or the distributors? So that is one thing which also you can look at it together from an elasticity standpoint. And I think overall, using technology as an overarching theme, because the first pillar which you would need is transparency to do all these things, right? All these are good to talk about in forums, but then these are not easy to implement because you do not have that much of information. You do not have that much of intelligence and investment on transparency and visibility, including your trucks, your track and trace, your inventory all across, your VMIs, so your inventory at the supplier, inventory at the preform manufacturer, for example, at the sugar manufacturer, for example. So all of this, I think, has a certain level of prerequisites which one should be aware of. Build a strategy which is a little holistic, and then question each and every element of the value chain, whether it is elastic enough for you to make sure that you are resilient and eventually having a cost structure which not only gives you cost but also service, both put together. So that's a little bit on elasticity. Sanjay, back to you.
Excellent. And stay on to the track, because there's a question from Akash Verma, and thank you, Akashji. The question is, with demand changing, and this is FMCG, so I wanted you to be there, right? Because your product is FMCG and you handle one of the biggest logistics. With demand changing on a daily basis, my question is, how are companies managing the back-end supply chain, especially in FMCG environment, where raw material procurement times range from 2 to 90 days?
Okay, brilliant question. So first of all, we are not FMCG. We are very, very fast FMCG. So there are 2 V's before FMCG. Yes. So demand management, I think the one biggest epiphany of this whole thing which happened during pandemic is, actually, do you need a forecast? Actually, you can't forecast in these times, right? Who can forecast which market is going to go on a lockdown, which pack is going to run, which channel will be resuming when, and when will the malls resume, when will the cinemas resume? I think it's not fair for you as a supply chain professional also to expect a marketing or a sales professional to give you a demand forecast. So how exactly you build in processes which move closer to replenishment? How do you build processes which are more coherent? There could be a set of C-class SKUs or B-class SKUs where you have more raw material, and a more AA plus where you have more finished goods and more downstream. So all that kind of thinking and that textbook, what we learned during our academics, is what we try to implement during these days of pandemic. So I think demand planning is not an easy subject in these times. Talking about post-pandemic, there is a lot of disruption which is happening in this space. I have a friend who told me that they are working with a startup company to use AI in demand planning, which includes inputs from social media. And that friend is in Reckitt. So they have just started this project. They have been there for about now 6 to 8 months in this. And this project is still on. Is it 100% successful? Is it manless demand planning? Maybe not yet. But I think these disruptions have started across the globe. There are many people who are starting to use and make a lot of science from data in demand planning. And this is an area which is to be looked out for. We'll have a larger disruption going forward, definitely.
Perfect, Umesh. Wonderful. Right. Now we talked about demand supply, we talked about risk assessment, we even talked about compliance and how you turn your distribution capacities, how you do demand forecasting, whether demand forecasting will stay or not. And also you need elasticity in your supply chain. There's a lot of stuff we crunch, and you can't do it on a manual basis. You need a technology to help. So I would like to get Professor Ashok on the screen. And Professor, uh, when you talk about investment in technology for an organization, right, there are two questions to it. One is, do you invest in your own supply chain right now in the nascent technology which is there, or you go out and buy new technology which you yourself don't know? And how do you play those levers actually?
Well, thank you, Sanjay, and I must compliment the panel members and who has given a very good insight into the supply chain in the post-pandemic and during pandemic world, whatever they. And I really compliment all of them. They have done a wonderful job, excellent job. All the companies have done it. Okay, they could deliver the things at home. Now, technology is very, very important. The reason is, sometime back, Ranjan said about visibility of the product. Uh, they wanted every stage there should be visibility, and since you are not able to forecast, there is no certainty about it, how much you are going to produce, how much you are going to sell, and how whom you are going to sell so much. There are certain demand comes up, there are the requirement comes up. So the visibility become very, very important at every stage. I really admire him when he says every stage visibility is required, and so that customers are also sure of what's happening around, right from their production to uh, finished product to dispatch, and at what stage it is there. Because this is what customer looking for. This in fact. Umesh also said the same thing about it. He said it's not FMCG, it's ISEA, I think super fast FMCG's company is there. And there again, technology has to play a role because suddenly there is spurt of demand and people are looking for more products. And if they are not able to supply it, order will go to somebody else. People aren't going to wait for his soft drinks. They will go for some other soft drink. They're not going to wait
Yes.
unless Coke comes. I won't drink anything. It's not like this. And that's true of most of the products now. People have so much of alternative at the click of button and they can get it about it. See, when
Perfect.
we are looking at certain studies, you see when McKinsey some studies there where they say the supply chain has only this level only 43% about it, and it has not really gone up very much high. But now they say it needs to be really improved upon it. In fact, this digitalization can improve upon the annual growth of earning can be increased up to 3.2% before interest and taxes. And the largest increase from digital and business area, annual revenue growth can go to 2.3%. And it's very, very important that companies do spend into these technologies. Well, they may be what you say nascent technology, they are upcoming up, but again depends upon who take the lead first, who will go first into
Yes.
the lead about it, who is the first mover advantage. Better to reap in the benefit right away rather than waiting for it when you lose out on the business part of it about it. So
Perfect.
straightway, my suggestion could be, irrespective of the uh, expenditure required, investment required about it, companies has no alternative but to get going with it, because today everyone looks for visibility, everyone looks for what's happening to my product. As my previous speaker said about it, forecast has become uh, it's not usable now, because forecast again look at the past data, and past data is really erratic. You can't just say what can happen about it. Past data cannot be used for now forecast because demand suddenly comes up, and in country as we are seeing the V-shaped recovery, we really don't know. There are a lot of pent up demand built about most a lot of products. Even Ranjan's company, this all this fashion garments and other thing. See,
Yeah.
a lot of people are not in buying during this pandemic because they are not going out and they want to remain away at home. Only people minimum think they have been buying it, and suddenly,
Sure.
moment markets open, things opened out, and I am sure you will find it difficult to even the supply about it. But today is not aware of what exactly people look for suddenly,
Yeah.
and because this pandemic, a lot of behavior of the people have changed, the demand patterns have changed. Not necessarily they look for the same product, but they've been looking pre-pandemic. A lot of requirements have changed. They're likely to be even shift into the demand of the people, what is about it. And for
Yeah.
this, these technologies are very, very important, and they can play a key role into giving the feedback. See, today, uh, most of the companies, they will only succeed about it if they really know the point of sales data. If they get the direct feedback on point of sales, what's happening exactly, what a customer has bought about it, and on that basis they can plan it, do it. Otherwise, what will happen? There is a fear now, post-pandemic, it can land up in a bull effect, wherein suddenly there are people who pick up few products and the demand will go on ramping up, and company will think, even if X is the demand, and then suddenly they'll end up making 10x, and there will be a lot of inventories get piled up. So companies are not to get caught into this type of
Yes.
problems as well. So it's very, very important they invest in technologies. They take the first mover advantage, and this is only going to benefit a lot about it. Because supply
Perfect.
chain, the older way, it's not really going to work on it. Today, customer
Sure.
looks for right from the factory when a product leaves till it reaches your doorstep. They want
Sure.
the full visibility, whether the product is reaching or right product is reaching. That's again very, very important. And further, this new technology like IoT, this Internet of Things and all, they can help into it so that supply chain visibility remain not only in terms of whether parcel is moving or items are moving, but exactly the right items are moving. There is no pilferage on the way. There is uh, no nobody steals the product and nobody replaces the products. So that people are not looking for my parcel to do. They are looking for what item you bought it, exactly the same item reached to you or not about it. That's very, very important that companies do invest into the new technology.
Perfect. Thank you. Now, I will move on to one of the areas where you talked about visibility. And Royston, I would like to understand, to bring you on the screen, is what are the technologies today which will help an organization, right? And they have given impetus by the pandemic to actually bring them forth. Which are those couple of themes or technologies that are very, very important today?
Right, and I think this kind of ties up everything together, right? We have Umesh very clearly saying, we really don't need forecasts. What we need to know is what actually selling, right? And I think Professor Pundir has also reiterated that. And at the same time, we have Ravi who just spoke about, making short-term contracts again, with linking back to small buckets. Because you don't know what's going to happen on the long term, you want to take small baby steps and look very clearly about what exactly you need to do. And we use different terms, right? We said elasticity, we said flexibility, we said agility, right? All of these terms actually are basically now from trying to, it's kind of blurring the line between being proactive and being reactive, right? You're kind of
Yeah.
the middle there. You're no longer saying that I will predict the future, because you just realize that's really impossible to do. But at the same time, you need to respond that quickly. And what underlies this whole thing, if you look at it, is visibility, right? And this
Yes.
is not something new. This is supply chains have been trying to focus on visibility for many years before this as well. But I think the pandemic has kind of really brought the focus to look at this area, right? Because if you want to be agile, if you want to do demand sensing, visibility is like the basic foundation on which you will build all of this, right? And companies, I think, realized that during the pandemic, that they were looking at visibility. It was never an end-to-end visibility, right? Many companies I know looked at it within their own boundaries, right? They were keeping track of what all happened. They when it came to a pandemic situation, and you need to know what your
Yeah.
supplier's situation is, or your customer's customer, then we realized that it's not as clear visibility which we have invested in. It cannot just be me as a company. It has to be a supply chain which has to give that visibility, right? And
Perfect.
even now, even within an organization, you may have a lot of resources, but there are dark
Yeah.
areas. Most companies would have this, right? Certain regions where infrastructure is bad, or there are labor and technical challenges, right? And these things can create a lot of challenges in operations. The purely bringing visibility. Other thing is, when you look at again the word supply chain, right? There are multiple organizations. Now we're talking about visibility across and between them, right? Between you
Yeah.
and your logistics provider, right? If you use different, for instance, different nomenclatures, different part numbers, you have
Yeah.
obviously different systems, right? All of these things start to create a real challenge when you are really trying to respond on a day-to-day basis to what is selling in the market, right?
Yeah.
And all of this kind of brings to the fore. And I'm not going to really dwell about different technologies. There are so many
Sure.
different solutions,
Sure.
so many people kind of promising the world, right?
Yeah.
But all said and done, there is always a gap between a tech aspiration and then the actual implementation. There are
Sure.
those
Perfect.
challenges, and you need to actually evaluate very carefully like Professor Pundir said, we don't have a choice per se. I don't think anyone has an option here. Those who don't really invest are going to suffer, right? But all said and
Yeah.
done, how and why, and really looking at it not really as an organization, but as a part of a supply chain. I think that is the perspective which has really
Sure.
been brought forward to the by the pandemic, right? I don't exist by myself. I exist as part of a chain, and that entire
Yeah.
chain needs to be visible. That entire chain needs to be flexible. That entire chain needs to be agile. I think that's where I'll
Perfect.
leave this point.
Perfect, Royston. Yeah, and you rightly said we don't have enough time, right? We already, I'm looking at the clock, is already 42 minutes for us, another 20 minutes to go. And great point in terms of visibility, in terms of being agile, in terms of looking end to end, and also in terms of looking at investment, which is neutralized, as Professor Ashok also mentioned. So let's get Akhil on the screen. And Akhil, with all this, what it means is you need to be elastic, you need to have visibility, you should be looking outside in. That means you need a lot of resiliency because your demands are not right, your the supply, your demand variability can be very high. Now, how do your businesses will accelerate from here, especially from a transformation perspective in matching demand and supply? And what does resilience mean in that real world of business in the next 2 to 3 years?
Right. And that's again a brilliant segue, combining everything what Umesh said, what Dr. Pundir said, what Royston said. It's it's a new world. You're talking. I love when Royston just said, I don't exist alone. I exist as part of a value chain, right? So that is a beautiful phrase because to me, uh, today's best practices lead to a dead ends, right? So there will be new paths, new unexplored, untried practices which will come up, and that's what we are talking of resilience. The resilience in itself means imbibing new practices, being open to change, being looking forward to do things better than yesterday so that we are evolving much faster. Now that reminds me of a quote, and I'll quote myself here is, customers won't buy any particular technology. I mean, while we all are very pro to technology, they don't. Customer wants one simple thing: solve my problem in a superior way, in a better
Yeah.
way than what you are solving today. And if that is the case, new Bill Gates, new Larry Pages, new Mark Zuckerbergs will keep on coming. And this time, this will
Yeah.
not be social media, this will not be search engines, this will not be operating systems. This will come all the way across the value chain, which
Yes.
has been by and I'll take a segue saying, by choice I entered supply chain. I
Yeah.
started my journey with sales and marketing, but I chose to be a supply chain guy because to me, this is where the next level of differentiation will happen. This
Sure.
is where relevance of the company's existence comes into question. And it was proven in last 2 years through COVID. These
Perfect.
disruptions will enable us to strike more of change, will ask for more collaborative actions, will look
Yes.
at bringing visibility together. And that to me is what will resilience mean. And we all here on who are spending our time here are
Yeah.
the beacon of light for that resilience to the world. I will stop by saying one more sentence here, and that is, while the world grew dramatically in last 30, 40 years with globalization, China for that matter took away all the manufacturing, right? With the COVID, the urge is to again localize the entire thing. You know what is happening in ocean freights and escalation of cost and everything. So things will start localizing, which means it's going to be new technologies
Yeah.
along with the new resilience, which will help us embark into a journey to make
Yeah.
us more resilient, more differentiated, and more importantly, sustainably relevant for future.
Excellent, Akhil. And stay on the track because there's one question that has come in from Ms. Ramya, and thank you very much, Ms. Ramya. We appreciate it. The question is, what are some of the trends you see in 2022 in supply chain space? You just alluded to it, Akhil, and you could just go on briefly taking this question.
Yeah, so I already applied to Ramya one on one. So I'll just for the rehash for everyone
Sure.
uh, during the call. So basically, I see, as I said, localization getting back. It's not going to be globalization anymore because it's going to be looking at four different pathways, which will be the new trends, and those four pathways will include, and I quote, will be around uniquely positioned, relevant, differentiated supply chain, which are proprietary technology based. And please mind that word, proprietary technology, because that will be a differentiated thing. Obviously looking at network effect, because it will be a single side or double side network which will be evolved technology, and doing things at a scale in a local area. So that's the broader trend. What it will include is getting to Royston's point, visibility. That's what we all need today. What's selling? Tell me that. I'll make that. Right? Tell me, how do I measure it? Which means there will be a tech enablement in manufacturing, which is IoT or Industry 4.0. All this data, once captured into the supply chain and analyzed, will, with the help of new age technology, which is AI and ML, everyone of us talk very much about it, but AI ML to me still is very early phases, differentiating a mouse from a cat, maybe a bit more evolved. That's what I'm saying, but that's how it is, the effectiveness today on a practical life. It's
Sure.
still academic, and hence the world trend will move to prediction and prescription, but the bottom
Yes.
line is visibility.
Perfect. And great. And as you said, the world trade will move to fix, right, to more on sampling, on reality. Let's get Ranjan on this, right? And I want to ask him a question from a geopolitical situation, as actually Akhil alluded to, right? What do you think organizations need to do differently, pre-COVID versus post-COVID, to continue on the path of recovery, and which is not going to be smooth, by the way?
Very, very interesting thing. And I'll just take the cue from where Akhil stopped, because it is very, very relevant from that perspective itself. It is in the current times, it is no more about thinking of being able to have a differentiated product by sourcing it from anywhere in the world, because there is so much of disruption, there is so much of uncertainty. A lot more is moving towards localization, and being self dependent, becoming much more relevant to the current context, reducing the lead time, be able to source a product, deliver a service which is as and when it is needed, rather than placing an order maybe 6 months ahead, 8 months ahead, because the challenges are many folds, and it is only growing every day with so much of uncertainty around us. So localization, because of this geopolitical situation which is arising, where different countries are behaving differently, different countries have their own challenges, with newer challenges coming in terms of power shortages, coal shortages, and many more to come. This is just the beginning. I can chipset shortages. I think it is all about becoming much more self-reliant, becoming much
Yes.
more self-dependent, and so that you are able to respond on time, and respond really, really fast with the services and products that your customers need, and you are agile enough to be able to change and modify the way how you work, and be able to deliver the services that is more relevant from a customer's perspective.
Perfect, Ranjan. And actually, there was a question from Miss Prerna from Celerity herself, right? How is Indian supply chain fraternity gearing to leverage latent demand from the user community, right? So you actually touch base on part of it is that we need to talk about making in India. We need to be self-reliant. We need to move away from one country footprint. You need to have a dual source strategy, right? So that's a fantastic answer to actually Prerna's question. So I would like to move on to Professor Ashok, right? And we talked about visibility. We talked about having a resilient supply chain. We also talked about, given the political situation, we need to be thinking local. So from a local perspective, from a local manufacturing perspective, Professor, do you think government needs to do something here, right, to encourage the localized manufacturing and to actually take care of the supply chain disruption so that you can produce more, you can sell more, and you can even go cross border, for example?
Yeah, thank you, Sanjay. I think it's a very, very important question you raised about it, based on the points raised by my colleagues over here. This localized manufacturing has become today even much more relevant than what it was yesterday. Reason is being because of the disruption in logistics, disruption in movement of the material, and as some of my colleagues said, okay, you don't know where we are heading to. If you look at some other countries, still they are facing the problems, and till I think everybody or a large number of people get vaccinated across the world, still risk is there. If there is some countries still people are not vaccinated, we can't say, okay, we have vaccinated ourselves, so we are safe about it. And someone very rightly said, during this period, even meeting our own friends, our own relatives, we are all not very comfortable, in the sense they don't know who is carrying what, whether I am carrying or they are carrying, and suddenly everybody will face the problem.
Yeah.
This localized manufacturing, if I say, it has been prevalent since I come from an automobile industry. I did work there a pretty long time.
Sure.
So this industry has followed it right from the beginning. If you look at the many of the leading manufacturers, whether it's a Maruti, whether it is Tata's, you'll find there are a lot of suppliers. Their own suppliers, they are very close by, and for them they don't face the problems. The reason is because they cut down their risk for movement, they cut down the risk on logistics. So if you look at Maruti and Gurgaon, they put the whole ecosystems of vendors, their suppliers, their manufacturers, and they keep on supplying them, and that's how they could reduce the cost. That's why they could have a continuous supply of the products. And same is done by Tata, let's in Pune, same are people are doing. Its only problem is happening when there is a movement, large number of distances. This is where the problem is happening. So during the pandemic, many of these companies could work, many companies would go ahead, and because they had a lot of local support, local manufacturing, and they could do it. So only certain raw material they have to ensure it is not the bulk of material. It's not the whole car material is coming from, let's say, to Gurgaon all the way from Chennai or Bangalore or Mumbai or Pune or wherever it is. So large amount of their production was happening close by. Now look at what's happening. There are the few items like the chip you would have seen. I think that's a big talk going on everywhere. Say what I was telling, there's a demand. The pent-up demand is coming up. People are ready to buy cars. People are ready to buy white goods. People are ready to buy TVs and other things. But chips are not available because they are all imported one. So what's happening now? Even though there's a demand, there's a requirement. So if you look at the production of the cars and sale of the car has been much slower during the last month as compared to what could have happened about it. So we are not able to capitalize on that. But if we had this localized manufacturing, I think this can help in a great way. And I must compliment this. Our Prime Minister has announced recently the Gati Shakti Master Plan. And I think that's going to work in a big way. Some around 100 crore he has allocated for it. And this is really going to accelerate the development of transportation logistics infrastructure in the country. And this is going to really create a help in this particular localized manufacturing about it. And we have no option but to encourage this as far as possible, have localized manufacturing about around the bigger companies about it. Yes.
Excellent. Professor, excellent. And you said it so very well. And some of the case studies that you provided about Tata, about Maruti has been fantastic, right? So we moved on from visibility to local manufacturing to geopolitical situation. We also talked about technology. Let's assume that we have everything, right? And as Professor Ashok just now gave two great examples of Tata and Maruti, of indigenous car, indigenously made, one of the largest producers today in the world, Tata. Now, Ravikant, to get you on the screen and talk about how does fulfillment can complement the whole manufacturing wave and the efficiency. And you think that there is automation can play a role in fulfillment, and how critical would that be as a kind of an aid to the entire value chain plan?
Yeah, and good question. A classic consultant answer would be yes and no. But so I'll try to explain why it's yes and why it's no also. So yes, from an automation perspective, you see a lot of automation in manufacturing, but much lesser automation in distribution. And there is a reason for that, because for any automation to succeed, the endpoints have to be fixed, and then it's very efficient and very fast and does it really well. That's the key thing. And in manufacturing, we know it is going to produce 1, 2, 3, 4 products, and there's a particular way to do it. And that's why you see a huge amount of automation. The amount of automation used in factories is way higher than what you see in any of the distribution centers, even the most advanced distribution centers, because the SKUs keep changing, products keep changing. How to manage that is a complexity. And post-pandemic, it's not only about the products, but it's about what channels does it flow through, which is changing the paradigm. So that also has a huge impact on automation. Now, if you are a product, let's take Ranjan's example, Bestseller as a company, they are doing X quantity or X volumes, and they're doing through retail. Now, post-pandemic, during the pandemic, you have seen a huge shift from retail from what you call B2B to B2C. Now, in B2C, the way you pick, the way you pack, the way you send, or the entire fulfillment process is extremely different. It's very different than what you do in B2B. The technologies required is very different. Now, another complexity is even within B2C, the level of technology required for handling a 5,000 orders per day or versus
Yes.
handling a 20,000 orders per day. Technology is way different. So how do companies plan for that? So yes, technology is useful. We all know that, because people are not going to come to my warehouse tomorrow because of some lockdown in a specific area. So I need my warehouses to be more automated so that they can churn out more, demand more. But the key thing is how much I have an idea about what is going to be my order profiles, what is going to be my channel strategy in next 6 months or 1 year's time of frame, so that I can plan that plan. Because if I plan a technology based on entire B2C, if the people come back to the pre-pandemic era and we say, no, I want to go to the shop and do the shopping instead of that.
Yeah.
And we know that all the young people are very keen to do that, but the money in the pockets is not for the young people, but the mid tier and this people. So therefore people will go back to shops. Then what do you do? The entire technology will be wasted. So I think the key thing is, while you're deciding technology as well, technology assists, automation really helps in terms of getting higher throughputs in this thing. But you have to be
Yeah.
very, very clear about what is the path we are going to plan for, and let's say in smaller buckets. So is there a way whereby I can, instead of investing in huge amount of automation, can I do this fulfillment with 3 or 4 small distribution centers or fulfillment center across the country, so that tomorrow
Fantastic.
there's no lesser investments in fixed costs, and tomorrow if that channel has gone down, I just shut up that fulfillment center. Something like Amazon or Flipkart is doing. There are 20 odd fulfillment centers, but
Yeah.
they need to have volumes to do that. So I think that's where it's a yes or no kind of a thing, but we need to be very, very wary about how much to invest in automation, especially in the
Yes.
fulfillment side. Yeah.
Fantastic, Ravikant. And you said it's so correct that generally, when we talk about automation and technology, we, even as a consultant, also start thinking more upstream into customer service planning and procurement, but not so much downstream towards execution into fulfillment four walls perspective. Yes, now today you have the drones coming in and taking physical stock taking in warehouse, and you have a lot of RFID also. So things are definitely improving. I would like to get Umesh on the screen, because Umesh, now you're back. I can see there is a very pertinent logistics related question, and that says from Mr. Patnaik, and thank you very much, Mr. Patnaik. From a logistics perspective, post pandemic and crisis like Suez Canal congestion, how much inclined are companies to promote intermodal transportation? And I'm sure you're looking at it, Umesh, in Coca-Cola as well. Umesh, you're there?
Just got connected. I'm so sorry.
Yes, you heard my question. Can I repeat,
No.
repeat for you?
No. Yes, please.
Okay, so there's a question from Mr. Patnaik, more logistics. It says, from a logistics perspective, post-pandemic and crisis like Suez Canal congestion, how much inclined are companies to promote intermodal transportation? Fantastic question.
Okay, so we don't have too much reliance on imports though, but still, so multimodal is something which will always, I think, continue to be a part of the larger strategy also globally or locally. Locally also, we have commitment of about 7 seaports and lanes where the government is trying to push for inland waterways, which will reduce, which is expected to reduce the freight cost versus road. And I think solutions from a global perspective, you can add probably Akhil or someone who has still dependency on global imports.
Sure.
Yes, Umesh, I can take this question actually. So,
Yeah.
Bikram, I tried to answer you on the question as well. I mean, basically, it's a go in very short terms. Yes. Tell me a better way to operate, which is sustainable, which is cross-border flexible, right? And I am able to pass it across countries, not even like looking at road transport. I'm looking at, for example, getting some of my finished goods, which is beer in this case, right from Vietnam into India using multimodal, which is trucks today. We have gone to evaluate that metrics because all these shipping liners are navigating things from Vietnam into China with a 3 to 4 weeks of long haul and then getting it back to me with 5x the cost. So the answer, Bikram, is companies which are interdependent across their units, spread across geography, and if it's possible to have multimodal transportation, they are exploring it.
Excellent. And Akhil, I wanted you to take the last question from Mr. Ritesh Kumar. What role does social media play in supply chain strategy going forward, as most of the businesses are generated from omni channels?
Great. And I'll actually put two more points before I answer that question. So social media plays a very significant role in any new age businesses today, right? We have seen tech-based companies evolving much faster. An example here is most of us being connected over LinkedIn directly today, right? So that's social media. So one, it enables us to get a lot of interest in people and with people who can be potential supply chain leaders tomorrow. That's one of the questions. And then the second question is, and I'm trying to find the part of it, just give me a second. I don't see the question here. Can you repeat it once more, the second part, Sanjay?
The second part is, actually there was only one question that I asked, right? What role does social media play going forward, as most of the business is generating from omni channel? So it's like social media and omni channel combined together.
Right. So as I said, omni-channel strategy will be more dominant, and obviously we will be looking at direct to customers. And social media, if you would have seen certain new age startups, they're just click and pick sort of a strategy at this point. So they might not even have their physical stores, right? They're just a total online media companies, and they are just using social media to attract, segment, target, and profile their consumers rather than doing indiscriminate mass media, right? So I don't need to give a Hotstar television ad if I need a media which is 15 to 20 years of age or 45 to 50 years of age. Segmentation becomes important. And that's where companies will continue investing heavily in social media. Facebook as one of it, LinkedIn maybe. Sometimes we get a B2B connections there. But what I see more importantly is also getting traction for business development, not only end consumer, but customers. And acquisition of customers to social media would be equally important.
Excellent. And we are right dot at the 65th minute, and we extended by 5 minutes because we started a bit late. Thank you very much, each and every panel member, for wonderful insights. Thank you very much. A lot of delegates who asked questions today. It has been a wonderful exchange of information. A lot of issues bubbled up, a lot of pathways to the solutions for a lot of delegates. I'm sure they were very happy. Thank you very much, everybody. I hand it over back to Charu. Over to you, Charu.
Thank you, Sanjay ji. Thank you, Professor Pundir, Akhil, Ranjan, Royston, Ravikant, and Umesh for sharing your thoughts and experiences and making this interactive. Thank you, Sanjay ji, as usual, for making this topic come alive. We thank our sponsors, Blue Yonder, and logistics partner Blue Dart once again.